The government's prevent strategy has been in the news again this week when they've been talking about something called cultural nationalism. Now, you may think, well, what does that actually mean? I thought the same thing, and we're going to delve into that topic a little bit. First of all, though, I'm always interested in how the United Kingdom is viewed by the rest of the world because, to be fair, at the moment, we're a bit of a laughing stock. We've got raging free speech issues to do with pretty much everything in public life, locking people up for Facebook posts. You're now not allowed to burn a religious book for fear of causing offence to somebody, which is a very, very strange state of affairs. And you've got all the rest of the stuff to do with police knocking on parents' doors asking if they've been sending snotty emails to school. I mean, you know about all this stuff, and I'm sure you're no stranger to it. But I'm always fascinated by the boiling frog syndrome. Over a period of time, it's very difficult to notice changes, small incremental changes in your life, in your workplace, in society, generally speaking. There's that slow, ever-turning stone wheel, which just turns a little bit every day, and so much so that nothing ever appears to happen while everything is happening over longer stretches of time. And when you look at the garbage that our government pumps out on a regular basis, it's easy just to get punch drunk on it. But in the prevent strategy, buried in the text, as unearthed by a lot of people this week, was the term cultural nationalism. Now, we're going to have a look at Sky News from Australia just to get a flavour of how the rest of the world is looking at the UK at the moment.
Government program. They're now saying that the real radical threat is people who think that just maybe there's a problem with integration and that Western culture is under threat from migrants who come in great numbers and don't integrate. And they're saying that this is now cultural nationalism, and they suggest that this is a radical ideology that needs to be stamped out and have people re-educated on. This is really concerning, and this is where I think people like Dominic Cummings have been going and warning of just how terrified the British state is of people in Britain being concerned that their country is being taken away from them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm concerned. This is massive. Prevent is a government organisation designed to stop terrorism, and terrorism is essentially blowing things up or driving cars into people. But instead, they've managed to turn their attention to far-right terrorism in particular, which only makes up a tiny fragment of terrorism. Most of it is Islamist. And they seem to be homing in on people who are concerned about mass immigration, who are concerned about, as you said, cultural nationalism, which seems to be a buzzword for really just being patriotic. And so what they're looking to do is refer such people to a de-radicalisation program. And it's interesting, one of the points that was made in that Telegraph article was that Keir Starmer himself recently made a speech about the country becoming an island of strangers as a result of mass immigration. So perhaps he might be referred to prevent. But the issue with this is that prevent, they're silencing the majority. They're silencing common opinion. And I'm really concerned about this. I don't want to sound hyperbolic or overly dystopian, but I'm concerned about violence erupting. We've had Professor David Betts, an academic of war studies, actually map out that when you have a combination of mass immigration, economic decline, and government overreach, then you're setting a situation which is ripe for this kind of violence and these kind of tensions to develop. Even just recently, Lisa Nandy, the culture secretary, she openly said that parts of England look like they're about to go up in flames. So prevent, the government establishment really need to get a grip of the situation and understand the needs, the feelings and the tensions that are building. And instead of actually trying to stamp it out, give them a voice and actually deal with the concerns at the root level.
Okay, so good little clip there. Let's have a look at the specifics of what it said on the website. So, terrorist ideologies for prevent duty training, and this is obviously briefed out to all of the minions on prevent. We define extreme right-wing terrorism or the active or vocal support of ideologies that advocate discrimination or violence against minority groups. Well, yeah, I don't advocate discrimination or violence. And I wouldn't imagine a lot of people would either. But what it's attempting to do here is it's attempting to subcategorize those extreme right-wing terrorist ideologies and their narratives. Okay, so if you're talking about white supremacists, so white supremacism isn't anything that I subscribe to. I don't believe that any race of people is biologically, culturally, or spiritually superior to other races. Okay, we have different cultures, but do I believe that white people are superior beings to other people? The answer to that's no. Obviously, most people would believe that also. And again, then you go into a slightly more watered down version of that, which is white ethno-nationalism. Now, I know that there's a lot of people on the farther end of the spectrum on right wing who believe in cultural homogeneity. I don't believe in that. I think the world is very, very mixed now and it can't be changed. And, it's a little bit like, putting some undiluted juice into water. You're never going to be able to extract these perfect, pure juices out. And just the same way with cultures around the world, really. It's already beyond the cultural homogeneity stage. It's never going to happen. And as such, it's just this continual anger that is espoused by a lot of people on the right of politics, and it just kind of flows out and never ever has an ending point or anything that they wish to achieve apart from generally generating anger and stupidity. However, when you start falling into cultural nationalism, then we're into something completely different. So the government here is categorizing cultural nationalism as something as defined as extreme right-wing ideology that the prevent strategy should be addressing in people, and we need to be identifying these people as right-wing terrorists. Okay. Now, one of the things I've learned on my journey through the battle between right and left, and the culture wars might be a better way to put it. Often when I'm debating people on the left, and when I have debated, these wokeista type people, they throw a lot of monikers around and they'll throw insults around quite freely at people, and they'll call you names and they'll say words. And one of the things that I learned a little while ago was that the definition of words is often the best way to argue with somebody from the left, because the left does not like definitions. It likes to keep things nice and woolly, and so it can not define anything. And so, as an example of that, you could say, what is a woman? And when somebody tries to answer that, as we've watched with certain politicians with a fair degree of hilarity, they stumble and they blubber and they get really flustered and they go, well, I don't know really what to say at this stage, because the left hates definitions. And really, if you're debating with anybody from the left ever, and they start throwing insults around and they want to talk about things, the important thing before you even start talking about it is, okay, let's just make a definition of exactly what we're talking about. And I'm going to do that here. So we're going to start off with something called cultural. Now, what does cultural mean? And granted, I am using the Google Truth Machine, but I think you'll all agree with specifically these two definitions that they're quite spot on. So something that's cultural is relating to the ideas, customs and social behaviour of a society. Now, all societies are different. You've got British society, certainly European, French, German societies, Japanese societies, American societies. And if you go to any of these places, you'll notice something, that they're all culturally different. They all have a different set of ideas, a different set of how they interact with people, how they would expect people to treat you in a supermarket, what people do of a Sunday morning, what's the general behaviours of these people in the various societies. And this word cultural is quite broadly used to define this because it's a perfectly harmless word. Our culture is the ideas of the society, how we relate to one another, how we would say good morning as we walk past them, the society that you live in and all of the behaviours that you are used to seeing. And I can guarantee you, as an example, I'll use Japan because that is a completely different culture to ours. If you were to walk down a Japanese street, you would notice a stark difference in how people act, how people interact with each other, how people laugh, and a million other different ways that you would never ever be to put your finger on unless you were in that moment. And so culture is very, very specific to each country. I would imagine that you would agree with that. And the word cultural bears no ill will as far as I can see. And of course, now we have to move on to a slightly dirtier word in the eyes of the authorities, something called nationalism. But even the Google Truth Machine, comes out with this. So nationalism is defined as identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. Now you could say, well, is it fair that, we're excluding other nations and we want to act in the detriment of other nations? Well, how about MAGA? How about the European Union? How about any country throughout the whole of time? I mean, apart from our country where we give away the Chagos Islands, for instance, because we have human rights lawyers running the country. But outside of that, every nation on earth acts in the interests of its own peoples. And everybody knows that. So nationalism has got nothing to do with racism, although the word has been dragged through the mud and it's kind of used as a stick to beat you with. And if you're in a polite place and you were to casually mention, oh, I'm a nationalist, the people would look at you as if you've just flown in from Mars. But the true meaning of the word nationalism is to believe in a nation state, to believe that you can have a sovereign country, as Brexit was promised, not delivered. So that's the meaning of the word. It's not anything nasty. It's got nothing to do with race. It's about culture. So we're looking at nationalism, one nation, supporting its own people, supporting its own interests, and yes, to the detriment of other nations, because that's how the world's worked since the start of time, and so it will ever be, and to pretend otherwise is ridiculous. And so if we were to put those two words together, what we come back to is cultural nationalism, as defined by Prevent and the government, as people saying, well, if you believe in cultural nationalism, and we're just going to define that for you because you're not intelligent enough or bright enough to define it for yourself, that means that Western culture is under threat from mass migration and a lack of integration by certain ethnic and cultural groups. Well, that's not what cultural nationalism means, first of all. So I've just blown that argument out of the water there. What they're going to have to do is come up with a different definition. But cultural nationalism is a good thing. Obviously, it means you're proud of your culture and you want to live in a sovereign country that looks after its people. And I'm really sorry if that offends people or they don't like it, but it's something that I'm well in favour of because every country on earth is doing it anyway. Every country on earth is proud of its culture. Every country on earth, the government have to act in the interests of the people and protect the people as their first duty. So to use the word cultural nationalism and try and push that through on the Prevent strategy, I think is extremely revealing of how this government feels about the people of this country and the narrative which it's trying to expand, develop and push using the word nationalism. It's quite clever that they do that because people are becoming scared to use the term. I'm not scared to use the term. I'm not a racist. I'm a nationalist. And that means that I believe in this nation state. And more to that, I'm going to come out there and say I'm a cultural nationalist. The reason I'm a cultural nationalist is as everything that I've just described to you there. But to also say that cultural nationalism in our terminology, means that Western culture is under threat from mass migration. Well, Western culture is under threat from mass migration. and a lack of integration by certain ethnic and cultural groups? Of course it is. Most people in the country believe that, and it's very, very strange that the government should want to position it in that way. And it astounds me, to be fair. And so, in conclusion, one thing that I did think about when I was looking at this, and it was, as I mentioned earlier, the boiling frog syndrome. The boiling frog syndrome is the fact that you can place a frog in some water, boil it slowly, and the frog doesn't notice that it's been boiled alive. And of course, that's what's happening to us at the moment. The question that sprang from that for me was, where's my line? What is my personal line? How much can I stand? I love living in this country and I can't imagine living anywhere else. But at what point do things get so bad that you would consider not living here? It's a little bit like being a butterfly in a hurricane at times. These issues are very, very important to the continuation of the United Kingdom, its nation, its culture, its heritage, its history. But so many people just don't seem to care. So should a person sacrifice themselves at the altar of that cause when very few people even seem to turn round and care? We're all, as a nation, it would seem, obsessed with, eating posh food and having nice wine and consuming huge amounts of things from Amazon and doing everything else we should supposed to, like mill round Primark at local shopping centres, mindlessly buying clothes that we don't need on credit cards that just trap humanity in a vicious cycle of consumerism. Most people just don't seem to care about anything apart from scrolling through their mobile phone and posting pointless things on the internet. And the irony of that isn't lost on me. Believe you me, I mean, am I posting pointless things on the internet? I certainly hope I'm not. But you understand where I'm going with that. Very, very few people seem to care. And the question that keeps popping up in my mind almost continually is, do I stand and fight? And that's partly what this channel is, by the way. That's what I'm doing here, if you hadn't already worked that out. This is my way of entering the culture wars, my way of defending everything that I love about this country and about the culture we live in, really, and everything political, because that's at the heart of the philosophy of where this is all going. And without power, you have nothing. Everything is about power at the end of the day. And so this is what I'm doing at the moment. But, I don't know where this country is going to end up. And at some point, there may come a time where it's just not worth living here anymore. At what point does the tax system, what if it gets to 90%? What if you're not allowed to say things on the internet? What about if you have to repeat certain things? What about if I have to stand on my porch outside my front door and bang a pan every Thursday night, as the ridiculous scenes that we saw in 2020? This type of cultural narcissism that we're in the grip of, this idiocracy that we're in the grip of, at what point do you turn round and go, you know what, I've had enough of this? And I don't know what that point is. And often the funny thing about boiling frogs and slow turning stone wheels is that you never know the straw that broke the camel's back until your back is broken. And it's not until you're in that situation that you realise you've already passed the line. It's almost impossible to draw the line for a future action that you're going to have. It's almost impossible to understand where that line is until you've passed it. And I haven't passed that line yet, not by a long chalk, but things like this. Cultural nationalism is right-wing terrorism. I really, at times, I'm speechless with it all. And that's saying something for me. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Have a good Sunday. All the best. Bye-bye.